Good afternoon, everyone. Happy 5 o'clock to you on Saturday. I'm Tina Brock, and I'm your host for Into the Absurd, which is our weekly virtually timed gather where we share with creative artists in the community and around the country. So very glad that you've joined us this afternoon for a conversation with Lynn Blackwell Denton and Christina Brandon-Gomez. I will get these right by the end of today. Thank you both so much for being here. I just want to very quickly say a big shout out to everybody who's here on Zoom. Please put your questions for Lynn and Christina in the chat box today as our conversation about the Milliners and the project that they're working on together, their cinematic collaboration. And if you're coming in on Facebook Live, welcome to you. It's so good to have you here as we continue to explore the creativity and what people are thinking about and just how they're getting through very existentially challenging times. So on today's show, Lynn Denton and Christina Brandon-Gomez, they are co-collaborators, screenwriters on working on an adaptation of a novel that Lynn wrote called The Milliner. And this screen adaptation is appropriately The Milliners. And we'll talk to them all about that, how they got to this place, their early work, Lynn's as a visual artist and Christina coming out of UArts with a degree in television and screenwriting. But let's get them both to the table now and get this conversation going. Lynn Blackwell Denton and Christina Brandon-Gomez, welcome to Into the Absurd.
Hi, Tina. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, I am so very happy to meet you. And we'll just keep this fire burning as we wait for Lynn to get here. Christina, I am very excited to talk to you about, and there she is.
There I am.
There you are, coming to the party, coming to the door late there, Lynn. You're right away, I'm seeing you in front of some beautiful work, which I'm assuming is yours, Lynn. So I don't know, I'm going to start right there, if it's okay with you, and have you tell us a little bit about where you are.
About where I am?
Where you're sitting and what you're sitting in front of.
In front of a painting. This is actually the last large painting I did. And it is from a series that I've been doing on 17th century Persian rugs, which I love pattern, as you can see from the script, love textiles, love anything to do with decorative cloth. And this series is really very much related to that.
And you're in your studio right now?
I'm in my studio, right? Yes.
Yeah, and I pass your studio every day. We're neighbors in the neighborhood. And I should say that we were scheduled, Christina and Lynn, there was going to be a reading of The Milliners, which is the cinematic project that they're working on right now, the script they're working on right now. Well, that was going to happen in November, and that can't happen. And so we thought, why not bring you both on and talk about what led up to that, this wonderful collaboration, and how you all met, which is just, I think, a beautiful story. Before we get to that, I just want to give a little bit of background on both of you, how you got here and the work. And we'll start with you, Lynn. You went to Agnes Scott right down in Decatur, is that correct?
That's right.
When? And and then got your MFA at University of Tennessee, was it?
Yes, with an interlude in New York at the Art Students League.
What led you up there after getting out of school?
I wanted to be in New York. I was drawn to New York and to the art scene there, and had never been north. Mm-hmm. So it was really amazing to be there. And I also became part of the audience at the Judson Poets Theater, which I had heard about, and where the performers were introducing all kinds of things to postmodern audiences. It changed my life as an artist completely to be exposed to that. So that was a huge influence.
When you say it changed your life completely,
well, it changed my views about art and about the relationship of the artist to the world and about the content of art. It was like breaking down another wall and inviting the viewer to come into the work. And it blew my mind completely. And it was a kind of unconscious absorbing of all of that, you know, the collaboration between artists and performers, Robert Rauschenberg, Lucinda Childs, Yvonne Rainer. I was just blown away by the way that they merged their talents in these performances. So yeah, it was a big influence, which later began to come out. I would say many years later, I had a lot to digest, a lot of journeys to go through, a hard time, very hard time emotionally. Made it through graduate school, and then spent a year in Paris, and then came back to the States and began teaching.
So you left New York to go to graduate school?
Yeah, I came back from New York to Tennessee and went to, first I had an emotional breakdown, and I was actually institutionalized. And it was I made a break with everything really in my past, and came back because I had a lot of good support. I was able to come back from it, and I was able to start all over. And I started all over, started my life all over really, and started into therapy and got my degree, went to France, came back, and really started a lot of intense therapy, which I would say saved my life. I really credit that with everything for the, you know, in beginning again to grow up and be an adult and to be an artist, learn how to be an artist. You know, in the South, I was never supposed to express my anger, usually my feelings, but I would say mostly the anger. Never was supposed to let that out. So I had a lot of anger to release. Yeah.
Do you feel that art was integral in a different way in helping you to create this new life that you did?
Well, the art was such a release for me, and I was able to let everything out in the art. I started working with a lot of different materials in the 70s with clay, with found objects, and I did some installations. That one of them is on the website in your promotional in your material, where, and this was a breakthrough piece at Nexus Gallery, which was an artist-run gallery at that time, a piece about my grandmother and my mother and myself and our houses. Actually 4 generations of women and the houses we lived in, and how the house is related to both a positive and negative self-image. So, and I had a soundtrack in the video. This was all new to me at that time, but this was Judson kicking in, right? So the soundtrack was about going with my grandmother back to the site of her old house, which was now a Hardee's drive-in restaurant. And she pointed out all the landmarks. She said, well, there was an alley through here, and there was a little pine tree by the side of the road. And the pine tree was the only thing left on our property. And it was just a very poignant memory. Yeah. So those things all influenced me later as I began to relate my past and my history to what I was making, and began to make film late in life. Went to Temple, and I studied film and made some films with the women at Temple who were in the MFA program. Started making shorts, and then I immediately, the first screenplay that I took a screenwriting course, and the very first screenplay was all about this character. It's been the same character for 20 years. In one variation or another.
I want to get back to that beautiful, rich history of your family in the South, which seems to figure into a lot of the work. But Christina, I want to talk to you a little bit about the time pre-meeting Lynn in 2019 when you all found each other at a conference and decided to work together. You were at UArts, right? Studying, was it television and film?
Yes, it was writing for film and television. That's what my BFA is. So it's fair to say I'm definitely up and coming in contrast to Lynn. So I was really in awe when she even offered this to me, back in 2019. At that time, I was a recent grad of my MFA at Arcadia in creative writing. So I started, and it was through PWIFT actually that I met.
Which is the Philadelphia Women.
Yes, Philadelphia Women in Film and Television. It's a mouthful, so we call it PWIFT. I had been working on Herrings, and it was right at that time that my dad passed. So I kind of withdrew into myself and focused a lot more on my personal writing. And that led me to my short film, Small and Mighty. I wrote that script and was able to produce it last year through another local Philly program, the Five Shorts Project. They have a contest every year, and they help independent filmmakers, turn a little dream into a reality. So I was very fortunate to do that. And it was at a PWIFT mixer, actually, that I met Lynn, and like all great relationships, started at a bar. And I don't know, she's so interesting and fascinating to talk to. And we shared the projects that we were working on. And she mentioned the Milliner, as it was called at the time, based on her novel. And it was just so interesting to me what she was trying to say and do. And I was really excited to be a part of it.
When you say interesting, what about it really captured you?
Well, I loved the fact that it was about a young woman. I love stories that have strong female characters, especially ones that are unconventional. And her backstory, that it was based on her grandmother, and was kind of about this oppression of strength and ambition in a woman in the South at the turn of the century, and how she wanted to be independent and a businesswoman. And that wasn't the expectation for women at that time. And I saw her as a bit of a trailblazer. She's young and a bit naive, but she's so motivated and focused on realizing this dream. And at the same time, at least in earlier drafts, there was a lot more of a focus on women's suffrage. And that to me has always been interesting too. And, all that it represents and how we had progressed. And we were coming up on the anniversary of women's suffrage when I first met Lynn. And yeah, it called to me. I could relate to a character like that who kind of defied conventions and didn't exactly want to do what other people expected her to do. And she took a chance and left everything she knew behind to chase a dream.
Could I just say, Christina was immediately, I immediately admired her writing and her sense of characters, and this character that we evolved from Dayo, who was she was in the script, but we reconfigured the plot so that there are two leading characters, one black and one white. And it was just such a journey for me, and I think for Christina, to investigate these two characters. For me, the black character, and for her, perhaps the white character, to get inside their heads, as well as the others. But it was just amazing.
Christina, let me ask you, is there, Lynn talked a little bit about her upbringing and how it was hard for her to express herself and really get out there what she was feeling. Did any of that resonate with you in terms of your interest in the project? Does it resonate for you personally?
Well, I was very fortunate in not having had to suffer any sort of suppression or discouragement as far as my feelings. I come from a very large family, a very loud family. And I would say that I was a little set apart as, the quirky, weird creative who watched sci-fi growing up and fantasy. But I had a kindred spirit in my dad. He and I used to watch a lot of the old science fiction, the original Star Trek. We would watch Doctor Who. So I had a lot of encouragement growing up inside the house, but I didn't fit the conventions outside the house, at least in a lot of the areas where we lived that were predominantly white. And, you just didn't see the quirky, nerdy Black girl. So I was very much an introvert growing up. I didn't have a lot of friends. I lived in my books and in my writing. And I can relate to that aspect of it, how my creativity is pretty much what kept me going growing up, when, it's hard when other people don't understand how it's intrinsic to who you are, the need to express yourself that way. And it was definitely criticized, not so much in the house, but outside of it, to the point that I felt I couldn't share it. So in a way, I suppressed myself. But I do think that with the encouragement of, my close friends and family, it's why I pushed to go to college and discover what I could do and what I was capable of. And I'm very glad that I did. It's been, this ever growing and evolving journey for me. And it went from screenwriting to creative writing. I was fortunate enough to study abroad in Scotland during my master's. And I absolutely loved it. And I love what writing brings out in me. And I love how it's a vehicle, to discuss the hard topics. And I feel like what Lynn and I did in writing this new version of the Milliners was, address what is not exactly comfortable and what is apparent even now, looking at what we went through this summer with Black Lives Matter. It's very important to see, the different perspectives, and I think our approach to writing this has been really interesting, because it was a way to share, why her looking at the way a scene unfolds is different from the way I see it unfolding, even though, we understand the same thing is happening, but it means two very different things to a Black character versus a white character, or a Black person versus a white person at that time in history.
Lynn, let me ask you about that. That was a question I had, and both chime in on this. I have sort of a two-parter. One is, how did the Milliners, the adaptation, is it dramatically different than the original novel that you wrote?
Well,
let's go with that one first, and then.
Okay, the novel was actually evolved from the screenplay. It represented one stage of the screenplay about 10 years ago. But at any rate, so the novel I published, I think, 2017. And now it has changed, of course, again. And with Christina coming in and we started to look at it all very differently, because we wanted to show the characters of Dayo and Keziah, these two women, both in the Jim Crow South at the turn of the century, around 1910, and how differently they saw the world. And I had a lot to adjust in my thinking. I mean, I think that still the assumptions are there, even though they might not. Well, there were assumptions, of course, about what Black lives were. And I'm sure that Christina had assumptions about my family and their lives. So it's been fascinating, real learning. Was that your question?
That was my question. And then the second part of that question, which is how do you do that together? How do you write or adapt a screenplay together? What roles do you have? How does that work?
Well, it started with Lynn's text. She had the original script that I read, and I really like, she has a wonderful cast of colorful characters who each, stand out in their own way. And when we started evolving the relationship between Keziah, the main character, and the original draft, and Dayo, who becomes kind of a partner in these newer drafts. One thing we looked at, and I'll use a really simple example that speaks to what Lynn was saying about assumptions, was the decision to go back home, for example. There was one point in the script when there's a scenario that Lynn felt was a really good motivation for Dayo, the Black character, to return home. And she's journeyed very far from Sapelo Island, which is a tiny island off the east coast of Georgia. And it had seemed so simple, to Lynn in the script. And I, to me, immediately I saw the challenge. I was like, well, as a Black woman in, Jim Crow, Georgia, she's living in a boarding house. She has a job. She can't pick up and go for, a week or two. It would be most likely out of her budget to do so. And she wouldn't have a job to come back to if she did. It's not the same as it is now. I said, so, that would be a life-changing decision for her to go home. A lot of Black people, when they left home in search of new work or, just to start building a new life for themselves, they did it understanding they may not go back. My grandfather's from the South. He's from Kittrell, North Carolina, and he left young, doing the same thing as a master carpenter. And it was a while before he could, go back home to see his family. And we were able to discuss that and, come up with scenarios that would work and that made it not only authentic to the time, but also important in the story. And so I don't know if Lynn, you want to add to that, but that was one of my favorite scenes that we evolved.
Yeah, me too. And when you wanted to bring in the islands in the, coastal Georgia islands, the Sea Islands, I love that area. And my family actually had a connection to that area. So it felt really good to really like being at home, to be in that environment with the Spanish moss and the live oak trees. And I could just envision all of that immediately. And so it felt very compatible with my past, that love of that environment. I think all of my mother's relatives were from South Georgia and Southeastern Georgia and the coast. Yeah, so, and I love the way the scene worked out. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
we've got it at the end where they both, well, you'll see when you read the script, but it's it's wonderful, a wonderful point to bring in that part of the landscape and Dayo's family living on the island.
What about the South provides such a rich palette for these characters and the work, do you think?
What about it does?
That's so rich. I mean, it's so identifiable with so many playwrights. And when you read Tennessee Williams or you read that work and you know immediately where you're going.
It's true. And I must say, I have to just bring in my great grandfather, who was such an inspiration, because he was a radical Republican during Reconstruction. He lost the election, ran as a radical Republican in a South Georgia town, and he didn't make it, and he was disillusioned and turned to drink. And I just thought he was incredible character, and he is in the screenplay because he was so important and he was such an important influence on my grandmother. I don't know, when you talk about colorful characters in the South, he's one of the most that I know.
Is it the community, do you think? Is it the weather, the community, the lush sort of landscape, the way communities um,
I
work
think
within each other? What do you think that is?
I didn't grow up in the South, but when I was younger, growing up, we would take family trips
Mhm.
down South, all like 12 or 13 of us crammed into one big blue van. And I just remember how different the pace of life was down there. And there was a sense of community. And you see that in the script too. Just this, almost second nature to band together. There's a lot of loyalty in the
Mhm.
South. And I think that comes through in the script too, where, your neighbor is your family in some ways. And, to an extent, you can find that in little niches up here in the North, but I think it's just the way life is down South. And I really liked that about the cast of characters in this story, how across the color line, they kind of just become this big, to use the metaphor of the quilts that inspired some of Dayo's artistry, this patchwork quilt of community down there. And I don't think this story would have worked as well if it had taken place just a few states north.
Mhm.
So I don't think that it could have happened anywhere but the South. And, the nature of that time of the post Civil War era with the women's suffrage kind of clashing with Black rights, well on its way to the civil rights movement. I think it just enriched everything that, we've been trying to say in this script. Gave us a lot to work with.
Yeah, the script is rich with that. It just oozes that area. I didn't grow up in the South, but having spent some time there, it really feels very authentic is the word I'm going to go with, but you know what I mean? Like you really get the sense of where you are. You brought up the quilt, Christina, and Lynn, could you speak a little bit to, I'm sitting in front of a quilt that was a very important part of your process.
You
Can you
know,
tell us about that?
as a visual artist, I always knew about Harriet Powers, who was this quilt maker, who was an ex-slave and a quilt maker. And I had seen this quilt reproduced. Now it's reproduced everywhere. It's all over the internet, but it took a while for it to get there. But at any rate, then I was writing this story, and I remember after I had created this character, Dayo, suddenly I remembered Harriet Powers, and I looked her up again, and their journeys were just parallel because Dayo comes from South Georgia. She she recreates the fawn tradition, which was a tradition of applique in West Africa. And in the story, she carries on that tradition. Um, and it was very exciting to realize that that was authentic, that there really had been a woman, Harriet Powers, who had sold her quilts in the 1890s at craft fairs for very little money, and had carried this tradition from West Africa over into her own work. That was thrilling to realize that. And so Christina has now taken Dayo and her work as an artist and an artisan, adapting these appliques to a new level, which it's very exciting.
How do you decide which parts of the script you're each going to work on? Do you write a section, Christina, and then how does that work? How do you?
Yeah, so for the most part, what we'll do is we take a look at the script as it was and what we want to accomplish or where we want to go. And sometimes we both write a scene and we'll read it and see either who did it better or what is working and what isn't. Most often we'll combine the scenes and then try to shorten it to make it as cohesive and concise as possible. And sometimes, it's just Lynn, she has an idea and a sequence and she just goes with it. And likewise, I really appreciate her trust in me because I know how close this work is to her, that, if I have an idea, I'll just, write out a few scenes and send it to her. And she gives great feedback. And it's really a lot of back and forth and give and take in that sense. And I think so far it's worked pretty well. I think we've managed to evolve, especially Keziah's character too, to bring a lot of depth and dichotomy to the character as she initially was. She was, very focused and driven, but I think there had been a lack of texture that in, I guess, throwing Keziah into the flames forced her to, make some tough decisions and to grow up. And so you now see this really great character arc for her over the course of this story. And so I think our partnership has created a good amount of tension in these characters. And, sometimes we don't agree on something. Sometimes, we question if it's a matter of, as Lynn was saying, our assumptions kind of coloring what we are trying to say or what the other person is interpreting. And so even if I feel we don't see eye to eye on how a scene is going, what comes out of it is a fantastic conversation as to why.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting that Dayo, the character of Dayo that Christina created, comes from a family that doesn't have much, but they are very warm and close. They have wonderful relationships within their family and very close and supportive. Whereas the character of Keziah, who represented a lot of my grandmother's story, came from a broken family where the men left and the women were stuck in this tiny little town and they had no money. And she had to just completely turn her back on that and go to the city and start her life over. So these two characters they had strength in different ways. Their strength came from different places. I thought that was so interesting.
Lynn, is any of this autobiographical?
Well, my grandmother's story was pretty much that story of not having any family left. Her mother had died. Her father was estranged, and she just left the little town. I mean, it was unheard of for a white woman to leave her little nest, of where she was supposed to be really privileged and taken care of. And she left and went to the city and got a job trimming hats. So that part of the story was absolutely true. And I've always thought, oh my God, what it took for her to do that. From then on, the character of Keziah was pretty much invented. And the whole involvement with women's suffrage and women claiming their rights was something that I injected into the story.
And that was a result of meeting Christina, or had you injected that in the story prior to that?
We had injected that into the story before, but we realized we wanted this story to transcend the women's suffrage movement in 1920 and women getting the vote. We wanted this to be a story about these two individuals, these two women who bonded in this unlikely friendship and became partners. And the suggestion that the rest of their lives will be enriched by this relationship. What do you think?
Each other.
Yeah,
no, I agree. I definitely agree with that. I feel like when I read your script, it was about, scrappy and very resourceful and determined young woman who came from, a fractured family and, made something of herself. And I think that now, while that is still a part of her story, this new story is ultimately about two women who are as different as they are alike, realizing that each is a person. Because, growing up in the South, Keziah has no choice but to see Dayo as, just a Negro. That's how she was raised. And likewise, Dayo has grown up with a certain resentment towards white people. And she just sees Keziah as, another privileged white woman. And what I think we've accomplished with this script is having two people, by the end of it, seeing each other as people, seeing the humanity that shines through and the similarities that they share. And I think that's what makes them friends in the end, is this respect and admiration and recognizing oneself in someone else. And so I think that's also what has made this such a rewarding experience for me, is that we were able to write about more than just, a woman accomplishing a goal or a dream, that it's more about learning oneself and one's flaws, where they are. Both Keziah and Dayo have to face that prejudice that they have within themselves and overcome it to succeed.
Right. And I wanted to, for my part, address the fact that each of these women found their creative voice in different ways, and that creativity that they found in themselves gave them the strength to go on to other situations. That's been such an important theme for me in my work, because I feel that if people are in touch with their creativity, then they are able to make a life where they're not acting out aggression against other people. And it's a transformative process. It's a transformative process not only for the one creating something, whatever it is. It could be within the home, it could be in a lot of different ways, but it's transforming, and it also transforms the people around you, I feel, because everybody's blessed by the fact that this person has found something that is rewarding and fulfilling and doesn't have to act out aggression against all the people around them.
Yeah.
Tapping into the true source of your power is your creativity, right, Lynn? And it is that what you're saying? And then it sort of just flows to a place that is larger than. I want to just ask you real quickly, Lynn. You had something I read that you wrote was, content is discovered coming from a place of unknowing, and this is, you're describing your process for I think your visual artwork, that you come from a place of unknowing. And I just sort of, I'm backtracking a little here, but it's a question that's tied to another one about you creating with Christina. When you would go into your studio to create your visual art, was there a structure around that? Did you show up at the same time every day? Did you go when the spirit moved you, when you got in there? How did you open yourself up to a place of unknowing?
Well, in the beginning, I mean, I'm going back to graduate school, and it was just a struggle for me to stay in school, to complete the program and put one brush stroke in front of the other. So I wasn't thinking too much about, I just wanted to, I think just the more I did it, the more comfortable I got with it. Finally, I reached a point in my life where I could sit down and feel that I was beginning something in a place of unknowing, where all kinds of things could happen. I wish it had happened earlier in my life, but it didn't. But, now I feel like, and with my students, I try to encourage them to think this way. They can start from any point and invent. And I never know what I'm going to come up with until the end. And even then, I try not to judge it. I try to just put it aside because, you know, when you're making something, you reach a point. And I don't know if Christina agrees with this, but I reach a point where I say, ugh, this is horrible. I can't do anything with this. But if you keep going to the next step, usually there's some kind of breakthrough and you're at a new point in your medium. I don't know. Do you feel that way, Christina?
I definitely do. My family can attest to my frustration when I reach a point in my writing where I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. This is horrible. You know, no one's going to ever want to read this. And I'm fortunate that my mom and my sister are very encouraging. And usually, like you said, when you keep pushing, you get to a point where something just falls into place. Usually, I have to take a step away for a time. And when I come back to it, it's like, well, that was probably there the whole time. I just didn't see it. I needed to take that break and disconnect for a moment to allow, you know, more to sink in. And then I can go back to it. And I've even found that, you know, in writing with this script, you know, when we come up against a wall as far as what we're trying to accomplish, and we're like, I know what we need to do, I'm just not sure how to do it. And then, you know, I think Lynn took some time away and I took some time away, and that sequence that we have at the end is the result of it. And then, like I said, it's probably my favorite part in the story.
Right.
I think it's safe to say, from what you're saying, that it sounds like your relationship has been transformed in the process of working on this script as well. What would you say, Christina, is something that's changed for you? Is it just an overall way of looking at the world or receiving information that your relationship with Lynn has changed? Is there something specific about that you could point to Lynn and say, I am so very grateful that you know, and did that find its way into the characters as well? Do you find what's happening in your own relationship reflected in how you write about these characters?
I think that what I have found in working on this project with Lynn, and why we had that breakthrough in rewriting this draft of the script and coming up with that sequence at the end. And I do think there are some external influences from, you know, all that's going on, whether it's COVID or the Black Lives Matter movement. What I found was that there was this wall between Keziah and Dayo, and we were struggling with how they could get over it. And it was after, you know, taking that, you know, step away that I realized I think that's the problem with the script, that way of thinking, that how are they going to get over this wall? And it's something that I think is relevant to the way we see race in this country. Is, you know, racism is a wall that has been built, you know, brick by brick over centuries in this country. And what we've tried so often to do is get the perspective from the other side. You know, we either climb over it, but we don't dismantle it. And so when I came back to writing that sequence and getting Keziah and Dayo to meet each other halfway, it was about taking the wall down, not trying to get over it or trying to help someone over to your side. Just remove the obstacle that's between you two, and suddenly you both have a new view. And I think that's what this working relationship has taught me, not just about these characters, but about how I'm viewing race in my life. You know, even with the election and politics, you know, we get so blinded by that wall that we have between us. And it's really hard to communicate with someone through a wall. So I feel that's my takeaway. And I'm truly grateful that I had this experience with her, because it's taught me so much about how to approach a dilemma. And it's definitely not how I did before. So I don't know if Lynn's experience is different, but that's my takeaway.
Yeah, Lynn,
You know, I think when you begin to work with someone, and we didn't know each other before we decided to do this, we had just met. So I felt we each needed to be able to trust the other. So that was a process of beginning to trust, and to trust more and more, enough to be revealing about what's really going on in yourself and in your relationship to the story. So I really learned that I could trust Christina and that I could be vulnerable about my life, my experiences, and that that would just strengthen whatever was there in the relationship. And that really happened. And I feel that the friendship now that we've developed that's come out of that is so rewarding and so rich. You know, I wouldn't take anything for it.
Well, there's so many wonderful dimensions to the fact that you're two women who share these, you know, a particular love of screenwriting and of telling stories. You have connections that come from, you know, your history. And Christina, to sort of go on a little bit of a side angle there, one of your films, did I read that one of your short films dealt with, you know, sort of approached, which one was it? Well, you'll know.
Yeah,
You know.
Small and Mighty, I think.
Yes,
Is what
Small
you're
and Mighty.
talking about.
Tell, yeah.
So I wrote that film. My dad died in 2017, and like I said, I'm more of an introvert, so I process things through my writing. I'm not someone who often talks about how I feel to, you know, the absolute frustration of anyone who knows me. So I recall, you know, there were some things about my dad and my grandfather, who's also a veteran, that kind of stuck with me. You know, like I never got to talk to them about this. Both of them died before we could discuss, you know, why they behaved this way or why they acted a certain way. And it got me to thinking about, you know, mental health, especially in the world that we live in. And I know that it's not often spoken about in mainstream media because, and this, you know, ties in with racial prejudices and stereotypes, but in Black culture specifically, you know, mental health isn't openly discussed. You know, there's so much else to deal with just in our daily lives, and in honestly trying to get what we feel is an even footing on the playing field, that a lot of times it's pushed aside. You know, you're told to man up or to be strong. And so you don't address the mental health issues, and they fester, and it becomes a generational and a cyclical thing. So in Small and Mighty, I'm dealing with a young Black veteran who has come back from assignment, and he's not handling it well. He's not acclimating with civilian life. And he has a young niece who, you know, has always looked up to him and believes in him. And he has a sister who recognizes that something's wrong, but the other forces in their life are kind of telling him to, you know, just deal with it. So I really wanted to explore mental health and really drive home the need to open up and to talk about it, and that it is normal to not feel okay every day. It's okay not to be okay.
There's a question about the plans of, about your film, like the next steps for the film. Lynn, can you speak, can either one of you speak to that? Because I know, Lynn, you want to direct this film, correct?
I do. I always envisioned that it would, I started out as a I'm a filmmaker, and I needed to tell this story, and that led to Christina. I didn't feel I could tell it by myself. I really want, the visual part to me is just so clear, and I'm really there. I mean, I can see the scenes unfolding like a painting. And so that is my ultimate goal, to direct it and to share it with other people. I think the story is very timely, very moving, and deserves to be on this. And of course, I love the big screen. And so maybe, who knows if movie theaters are done for, but boy, I sure hope that they'll come back and that we'll have a chance to see things on the big screen, including the story of the Milliners.
Did you keep the title because the original was The Milliner, or does it still resonate in the adaptation, the title of the film?
What do you think, Christina? What do you think about that?
I think it does. When initially you brought it to me, it was about Keziah's journey as a milliner. And in this version, Keziah also shows Dayo that she's an artist too. And that's something that I discovered in writing Dayo's character, her journey as an artist. When she came to Atlanta, it wasn't to share her artwork. She didn't see what she did as art. She just saw it as a tradition that had been passed down, and honestly, a practical means to an end. She could make money doing what she knew how to do well. And in the course of their relationship, learned that she had a talent and that someone else could not only admire her work, but appreciate all of the history and the emotion that went into it. So Keziah teaches her, new constructs with her art, and she kind of pushes her to try new things and to challenge what she's known. And so she applies some of her tradition to what Keziah has shown her. So I think it is fitting that they are both, by the end, milliners. Keziah comes in knowing that that's what she is, and by the end, Dayo realizes that's what she could be.
Yes, and I also hope that they, and maybe this is something we don't know if the screenplay's finished, but it's getting there. But anyway, I would love to show that they were touching the art, the creative part of themselves, and it might open up into other art forms as well. I think Keziah sees herself as, she's seen the art movements in Europe. She's seen the women like Sophie Tober-Arp and Sonia Delaunay making things alongside the men, whether they're recognized or not. And she expands in some of those ways with unconventional materials. And I would like to think that that continues to expand for her, and that maybe for Dayo, there is a kind of focus too that takes it a step further than what she started out with the traditional forms.
It occurs to me that there's another story here that is the story of two screenwriters that are coming together, who are expanding their possibilities and their creative worlds through the relationship that they have together. And I think it's extraordinary the way the relationship is transcending into the work that you're both doing. And I would love to sit here and talk with you all night about this project and have you both come back and talk to us about when we can get back in a room, Lynn, and you can do a reading of this and see that next step and talk to you both about, because it just feels like this is one of many projects that could come forth from you both.
Yeah.
Is there anything either of you all would like to add?
Well, I do see someone saying, when will the screenplay be available to read? I'll throw that to Lynn. I personally, I'm one of those people who I never feel my work is finished. Like, I'm that writer who
obviously I don't either, because it's been going on for 17 years.
I can always go back and find something that I would change. But
okay, ladies, we're going to make another show, and by that time, what do you think, Lynn?
It will be done soon. I can see this, I can visualize it just like Lynn can. And I'm not handy with a sewing needle at all, but I can see just the costume design and the wardrobe. Whoever is blessed with that responsibility can just let their imagination flow. So I'm excited. I do think that our goal is to, by the spring, have a reading so that we can get more buzz. And I think Lynn and I were talking, I think last week or right before Thanksgiving, about getting a trailer together, which will be fun, to cast a trailer and just get a taste of 1910 Georgia.
Right.
Originally in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
but we'll make it work.
You've painted just the most beautiful picture and most exciting picture that just you want to be a part of. You want to know where it's going. You want to be, you want to be in that story or seeing that story develop. So we will pick this conversation up again, hopefully in the future when you've had that reading and you all have sort of move to that next place of development as artists and just the screenplay. And I just thank you both so much for sharing the work you're doing, a really important and a conversation just for us all as artists and as people and as women just making art. Lynn, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, we'll look forward to the reading at the Bethany Mission Gallery. We've already got it cast just about, and we can't wait. So,
well, when the gods allow us, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
To be back out and
coming soon
to a gallery near you. Well, Christina Brandon-Gomez, thank you so much. And Lynn Denton, I love that you're right up the block and creating art. And I walk by your beautiful windows, and thank you so very much. And I look forward to seeing where this all goes.
Thank you so much, Tina. It was such a pleasure to do this for us.
My pleasure. And for everybody who's joined us today, thank you so much. And just for being here, for being supportive, for all of your comments and everything that you contribute to the conversation. This is such an important time as we see that artists are really thinking and working and really doing everything we can with such challenging circumstances that are enriched by the conversations and the time that we're in. So thank you so much for being here. And I hope that you will join us next Saturday, December the 12th, when friend and colleague, Dr. Stephen Peitzman joins us at the dinner table. Dr. Peitzman is a medical historian. He is a professor of medicine at the Drexel University School of Medicine. And we're going to talk to him about so many areas that he's involved in. His early work as in medical education here in Philadelphia, and so many actors that have done work as standardized patients, myself included, have the privilege of working under Dr. Peitzman and seeing how very important medical education is. We'll talk to him about his work as a medical historian, the books that he's written, and how he has entered onto the amateur stage with some of what he's learned from those very well-known faces on Philadelphia stages that have been standardized patients throughout the years. So it's going to be a fun conversation. I hope you'll join us. And thank you so much for being here tonight and the week ahead. Just wishing you, from everyone here at the IRC, a very safe and a very healthy week. Thanks for being here.